Hello everyone, welcome to the all new ThyGap podcast episode. This is me being Brute, and with me are you people. Bogus unfortunately couldn't join today's recording because Bogus had something stuck in his teeth. So therefore, he's not in a position to talk. So once again, welcome all of you to the world famous ThyGap podcast template. It's not easy, and today we are going to talk about perspective. So we'll start off with, what does the word perspective mean? As per the dictionary of the great Googles, it has two meanings. The first one is the art of representing three-dimensional objects on a two-dimensional surface. Blah, 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 blah. Not relevant for us. The second definition, rather, is very close to what we wanted to speak about and the context of perspective. It says a particular attitude towards or way of regarding something, a point of view. I think for the first time in the It's Not Easy format, the Google meaning is very close to what I wanted to speak about in terms of perspective, setting up the context. I want to repeat this once again: a particular attitude towards or way of regarding something, which is also a point of view. And the word attitude is what is piquing my interest, because I think perspective always is colloquially said as like it's just a point of view, it's your opinion, etc., etc., but it's not quite. It is actually the way we think about something, or the attitude that goes into decoding or understanding something. So that is the context of perspective, and why it's not easy is what we are going to dwell deep into in this episode. And but before that, I just want to ensure that we are all on the same page. When I say same page, I'm talking about the social media pages. So on Instagram, we are at _ThyGap. On Twitter, we are at ThyGap. And then you can write to us if you are one of the fans of writing long emails and more intimate personal messages. You can mail us at mindthygap@gmail.com. Now that's out of the way. Let's go ahead with understanding more about today's episode, or today's topic, which is perspective. It's not easy. So, what is perspective? Like I just mentioned, it is the attitude with which you look at something, or it's the way you comprehend something or dwell into something, which is colloquially said as point of view. But in my subjective opinion, a perspective is fundamentally how a person would take into account everything that he sees with regards to that context or that particular topic. And then the whole process of coming down or creating an opinion is what it is. Yeah, right? The whole activity in itself is called perspective. It's very seldom spoken that, you build a perspective. So that's a common statement, but it's not quite always seen in action. We only see the output of somebody's whole process. So we think that perspective is an opinion. But to be honest, it's not quite. So it's just a word, it's just a suggestion to everyone, all our listeners, that whenever somebody says that this is my perspective towards XYZ, then just don't consider that to be an opinion, but rather ask more questions about it. Like, how did you come up to it? What all did you think about? Why are you thinking in this particular way? And then you'll slowly unravel the whole process of how they came down to that particular statement or outcome. Just for the sake of the conversation, I can say that particular opinion. Now, it's a great thing. I mean, it's a really, really interesting topic, because once again, it is out there, but we quite don't dissect it, or we don't even bother to understand it deeply, which is why I have chosen this particular topic. Like I said, my definition of perspective is not just the point of view or the opinion or the output, but it has a lot to do with what our mental state was when we were thinking about it, what are the things that we have considered, and the whole gamut of things. So that is to establish the context of what ThyGap means by perspective. And now we're going into the next segment, which is, why is it not easy? So it's a simple, straightforward question. Why is perspective not easy? Let me answer it in multiple ways. Okay, the first way is mathematical way. Now, 7 billion people, 7 billion minds, and we have 7 billion outputs or thinking patterns. So that in itself tells you as to why understanding perspective is not easy. because there is no set definition. We all make our own definitions of perspective, and we all think in our own way. So what we think, it's not a plug and play. It's not that, oh, I take perspective and put it into anything, then there is a set outcome that will come which matches everybody's thinking. It's not quite true. So therefore, mathematically itself, it makes implausible to understand what perspective is, right? So that is the number one reason as why it's not easy. The second is, whenever we talk about thinking about something, all it takes is a grain worth of deviation for us to go to completely different conclusions. It's in you know in what do you call, this is where I miss Bogus, because he knows all the tough words. In navigation in the sea, it's called a degree of deviation, right? Which is basically, you want to go from point A to point B. In the sea, you need to set your navigation system in a way that it follows the longitudes and latitudes and blah blah blah. And if you have miscalculated the degrees of what kind of turn you have to take at which point, by just 1 degree, by the time you reach the end point, you're completely far off from where you intended to reach. That's called the single degree of deviation, which is, even if you're wrong by just a degree in the beginning, then you basically are landing at a completely different place. To paint a picture for you, Columbus, who initially wanted to start off, the person who basically discovered America, he initially started off to find India, but because he was not, on the hindsight, he's not that great at figuring out maps or seeing compass and following directions, he completely landed in a different place. So that is what can happen. I mean, it can work out in your favor in some times, but when we are putting it in the context of perspective, just by misunderstanding the smallest detail or miscomprehending the smallest detail, you can basically you can have a completely different picture of your understanding. And your understanding primarily is coming from, the perspective that you're putting upon, right? The kind of picture that you're painting for yourself. So that is another reason why perspective is not easy. It's because of this thing called a single degree deviation, flaw or technique or whatever you call it. And the fact that we have to be really, sensible and realistic, that there is a very good chance of we misreading something. And that can take us to a completely different scenario and distort our perspective from the reality, which is also another reason why, perspective doesn't become easy or doesn't come easily for us. The third reason, which I would say is kind of related, or, it's kind of like a sub point of the previous point, which is a single degree of deviation. It is the fact that the devil's in the details. Now, let's be honest, guys. Like, we all have become extremely impatient. We are not someone who are ready to invest a lot of time in understanding everything to the nitty-gritties. So every time we miss out on any small detail, it contributes to the degree of deviation, right? So that, again, is basically taking through the whole cycle of creating a completely different picture, and the end result, you having a very distorted perspective about what your understandings are of any particular topic, right? It can be, if I have to give an example, it can be about cooking. I mean, I think cooking is a very good example to explain how things can go wrong. I mean, it's not kind of like a perspective example, but even if we start making small mistakes at the beginning of cooking the recipe, then basically by the time you finish cooking the complete recipe, you have something that is inedible, right? Which you can't eat. I think inedible means that, once again, I miss Bogus here. But you get the point, right? Like, you need to give importance to the details. If we are not giving importance to the details, then we miss out on a lot of things, and the overall picture would not be very fancy. So we got 7 billion people, taking from the top. which gives us 7 billion perspectives because we have 7 billion minds which are thinking and active. Then you have the problem of a degree deviation, which is if we are missing it by even a centimeter, then we are painting a completely different picture. And then we have the issue of attention to detail, or understanding all the details. We really need to know what are the details so that we have them in our grasp. So that's another problem. And that brings to the bigger problem is the fact that we can't see everything. There are so many factors which play in building a proper perspective, out of which I personally feel empathy is a huge factor. Because yes, we can build a perspective, but if we have to understand someone else's perspective, empathy is probably the biggest bridging, factor that will help us really get the perspective of the other person. But if we can't see everything, if we can't look at things from different angles, and that can happen for many reasons. It can be because we are not experienced enough. That can be because we don't have enough empathy. Like I mentioned, empathy is a huge factor. It can also be for the fact that the other person might not be articulating their perspective pretty well, or the situation pretty well, which leads us to not really understand the complete picture properly. So all these things are contributing. It's not just our mistake. Sometimes it can be the other person's mistake. I mean, let's be honest, we are very comfortable blaming others. So why not give enough blame for others that, hey, it's their mistake for not, painting the right picture. And that happens quite often, right? Because again, they trying to tell you or painting a picture to you depends on how much they trust you or how comfortable they are in talking to you, etc., etc. But like I said, this is more about how do we create perspectives for ourselves based on not just for our scenarios, but for someone else's scenario also. So all these factors put together, you throw them in a bucket and you realize that, building a perspective, it's not actually easy. It's not at all easy. So for the aforementioned reasons, perspective is not easy. I hope everybody is with me up till this point. Now let's go into why is it important? Well, everything needs a fuel. Every action we do needs a fuel. Every idea we get, or every solution we think of needs a foundation. And perspective, I believe strongly, gives the strongest foundation to any of these things. Right? If we do things without perspective or without a foundation like perspective, then most often than not, they won't last. They don't have the kind of intended impact that we have. It's almost borderline like saying, oh, if you don't have a dream, if you don't have a North Star in what you're doing, and if you want to just blindly do stuff, then you're better off not doing it. And that is why perspective, becomes important to ensure that you are investing in activities which really give you some tangible output that make a difference to you, right? That is the number one reason that I can think of as to why perspective is important. Apart from that, again, if I have to say what else does perspective do, why else is perspective important, think about it. Perspective is like the underlying story that you are building constantly across your life, so that the different tasks or acts that you do have some meaning to them, right? Now, just to paint a picture once again, imagine taking up a job without really having the knowledge or understanding of where you fit in that job, or what is the skill set that you bring to the job. That becomes really important, right? And if you just do something blindly, long story short, you really won't enjoy it. You'll have a problem in continuing in the job, and you keep questioning as to why am I doing this? And that question always comes if you do not have a perspective about things. Now, you can take that principle and put it in any walk of your life. It can be a relationship, it can be a friendship, it can be, it can be a simple thing like setting up your own life goals or creating a bucket list. So, perspective acts as the foundational fuel for all these activities that you have. The other thing is that why it is important to understand perspective is, like I mentioned in the beginning, perspective is not just a single statement. It's not an opinion. It is not a point of view alone. It is a complete process. Plugging in, it's not easy process. You can understand more as to why process is important, and you will also understand in that episode once you listen through it. Is it's a never-ending thing. So perspective is very close to a process wherein first we need to understand that it keeps building, right? Perspectives don't end. Yes, you have like a reference point, which, where you say that, okay, fine, at this point, this is what I think. And this is my perspective towards, say, money, or this is my perspective towards, say, friendship or love or whatever. But it keeps changing, right? Because things around us change. We become smarter, we evolve with our experiences or with our knowledge or whatever you say. So every time you keep growing as a person, your perspective on things will change. And that's a good sign, because that will tell you that, okay, you are covering all the bases, right? It's not just that I have a, unidimensional approach towards life, but the fact that I have multiple ideas, I have multiple reference points to understand single emotion or an activity, is the fact that I am getting to know more about life in general. So that is something that I would like to put out there, that always do not make your perspectives confined. Always give them breathing space. Make yourself free. Like, think about things which you have not thought about. Don't be afraid of being in the uncomfortable or the unknown just because you don't have an understanding. If you understand, and why I'm saying this is because if you have a grasp about the fact that perspective is a ever growing tool or a quality of yours, then you will understand that yes, the only way I can still evolve and become better is by me being in tough situations or being in places which are not to my favor, so that I even experience the other side of the coin. So that is why perspective is important, guys. It builds us into a stronger being or a person. It helps us to evolve and grow. This is the first time I've tried doing this alone, and to be very honest, it's very difficult to do this without bogus. It's not easy, right? But at the same time, hey, if you've really at least made sense of what I just said, or if you think that yes, Brute has a point in perspective, I think we need to relook at how we build perspectives. And then my job is done. I think that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to ensure that I am able to interest you enough to think about perspective and give a new perspective to perspective. It's all inception. It's meaning inside meaning. It's definition and under definition. So that was today's episode, guys. It's perspective. It's not easy. It's a lot more than we think. And if you have any other comments about what you think about the word perspective, then hit us up. You know where we are. Up till the next episode, please take care, stay safe, and pray that bogus can start talking immediately. And like we always say, ThyGap Podcast, subscribe and share.